We were sitting there in silence, just the two of us, the glow from the TV painting soft shadows across the room. The world outside felt far away, almost forgotten, as if time itself had slowed down just to trap us on that couch together. My chest was tight, my thoughts restless, because his presence always did that to me. I wanted to laugh, to speak, to do anything that would ease the weight in the air, but instead I stayed still. And then, without warning, I felt his hand move, sliding down slowly, carefully, like he was afraid of breaking something fragile. My breath caught in my throat. In that single moment, the truth we had both been avoiding finally became impossible to ignore. The night had stretched on longer than either of us expected, and somehow we ended up side by side on that old couch, the cushions sagging just enough to pull us closer together. The room was quiet except for the faint hum of the television playing something neither of us were really watching. My mind kept drifting away from the screen, caught instead on the weight of his arm resting just a little too close, the warmth of his body pressing against mine like it had every right to be there. It wasn't the first time we'd sat together like this, but something felt different. The silence wasn't the easy kind we used to share when we were kids, when words weren't needed because everything was simple. This silence was heavier, charged, like it was holding a secret we both knew but didn't dare speak. I kept my eyes fixed forward, pretending to pay attention to the flickering lights on the screen, but inside I was a mess. My chest tightened with every passing second, my palms sweating even though I hadn't moved. I thought about the years we had spent together, laughing until our stomachs hurt, sharing stories we never told anyone else, building trust brick by brick until he was the only person who really saw me. And yet, there was still something I had never let him see, a truth I had buried so deep I convinced myself it was safer never to dig up. Still, in that moment, all the walls I built felt weaker than they ever had before. I don't know if he could hear how hard my heart was pounding, but I was sure the sound filled the room. His arm shifted just slightly, and the movement sent a wave of panic and anticipation through me. Every part of me wanted to move away, to stop what I felt building, but another part, the part one had silenced for too long, wanted nothing more than to stay. I remembered all the times I caught myself looking at him too long, memorizing the way he smiled, the curve of his jaw, the ease in his laugh. I remembered convincing myself that it was nothing, that it was normal to feel that way about a best friend. But now, with just a few inches between us, I could no longer lie to myself, and then it happened. Slowly, almost hesitantly, his hand began to move. It slid down the side of the couch, brushing against my fingers so lightly I wasn't sure if it was by accident or intention. My breath caught immediately, and I froze in place, afraid that even a small reaction would break whatever was unfolding between us. The air seemed to thicken, like the room had shrunk to just the space between his hand and mine. I couldn't bring myself to look at him, because I was terrified of what I might see in his eyes. Was he testing me? Was he trying to say something without words? Or was I just imagining all of this, letting my feelings twist ordinary movements into dangerous fantasies? The touch lingered, not forceful, not demanding, but there, present, undeniable. My entire body was on edge, caught between the fear of losing the friendship that meant everything to me and the desperate desire to lean into something I had dreamed about in silence for years. Every second felt stretched, like the world was holding its breath with me. I wanted to speak, to ask him what he was doing, but my voice refused to come. My lips parted slightly, but no sound escaped. Instead, I let the silence hang, heavy and trembling, because maybe words would ruin what had already begun. I thought about every warning voice in my head, family, society, the ones that told me this was wrong, dangerous, something to hide. But I also thought about the loneliness I had carried, the longing I never admitted, and the way no one else had ever made me feel safe enough to even imagine love. He had always been different. With him, my guard fell without me realizing it. And now, sitting shoulder to shoulder, I wondered if maybe, just maybe, he had been waiting all this time for me to see it too. I finally let myself turn, just a little, stealing a glance at him from the corner of my eye. His face was calm, his expression soft, but there was something in his posture that spoke louder than words. He wasn't pulling away. He wasn't afraid. His hand remained where it was, close enough to make me ache, steady enough to tell me this wasn't an accident. My throat tightened, and my stomach flipped as I realized we were both teetering on the edge of something neither of us could take back. The television droned on, forgotten. The room felt too small, too intimate, as if every wall leaned in to witness what we weren't ready to say. My mind begged me to do something, anything, but my body stayed still, locked in a fragile moment where everything could either break or finally begin. And there, on that couch, in the dim glow of the screen, I felt the weight of years of silence pressing down on me, daring me to choose, run from it, or let it change everything. My heart was still pounding from that single touch, and as the silence stretched between us, I wondered if he could feel the storm raging inside me. Every second seemed to drag on, every breath heavier than the last. I wanted to move, to say something that would release the pressure in my chest, but the words were caught in my throat, trapped by fear and hope tangled together. His hand didn't pull away, and that quiet courage in his stillness sent 1,000 thoughts racing through my head. Was this really happening, or was I so desperate for it that I was inventing meaning where there was none? I shifted slightly, trying to calm the restless energy inside me, but as I did, his fingers brushed more firmly against mine. It was subtle, tentative, almost shy, but it was enough to leave no doubt. He was reaching out, not by accident, but by choice. I swallowed hard, my lips parting as if to speak, but the only sound that escaped was a shaky breath. I turned my eyes toward him slowly, afraid of what I might see. His gaze wasn't on the television anymore. It was on me. His eyes held something I had never seen so clearly before, something that scared me more than anger or rejection ever could. It was vulnerability, raw and open, as if he had torn down every wall and was waiting to see if I would do the same. The look made my stomach twist, my skin flush hot, because for the first time I knew, he wasn't hiding. He wasn't pretending. He had been carrying the same secret I had, and now he was daring me to meet him halfway. The weight of that realization nearly broke me. 1,000 memories crashed into my mind all at once, moments when I thought I saw something in his smile, times I felt his eyes linger on me a little too long, nights we stayed up talking about life until the sun rose, and I secretly wished we could stay in that space forever. I had buried those feelings, locked them away, convincing myself it was safer to believe they were mine alone. And yet, here we were, sitting side by side on that worn couch, the truth slipping out of us without a single word. He took a breath, his chest rising and falling slowly, and then he whispered, barely audible, "I've been wanting to tell you something." The words were soft but sharp enough to cut through the thick silence. My pulse jumped, and my throat tightened so badly I thought I might choke. I wanted to respond, to urge him to go on, but all I could do was nod faintly, my voice stolen by the gravity of the moment. His fingers moved again, this time curling slightly, brushing mine like he was trying to give me permission to pull away if I wanted to. I didn't. I stayed still, trembling, because deep down I didn't want to run from it. He hesitated, his eyes flickering down to where our hands almost touched, then back to me. His voice broke a little as he finally said, I can't keep pretending anymore. I've felt this for a long time. The words hit me harder than I expected, not because I hadn't imagined them before, but because hearing them out loud made everything real. My chest felt heavy with relief and terror all at once. Relief, because I wasn't alone in the feelings I thought were mine to hide forever. Terror, because saying it aloud meant it could no longer be ignored. I closed my eyes for a second, trying to steady myself, but when I opened them, he was still there, waiting. His expression was nervous, his jaw tight, but his eyes never wavered. He was giving me the chance to run, to laugh it off, to pretend nothing had happened. But he was also offering me something deeper, something I had been longing for even when I refused to admit it. My voice finally came, shaky and unsteady. "You mean, you feel the same way?" He nodded quickly, almost too quickly, like he had been holding those words back for years and couldn't risk losing this chance now. "I didn't want to mess this up," he admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "You mean so much to me, more than anyone else, and I was scared. Scared that if you didn't feel the same, I'd lose you." His honesty hit me like a punch, knocking the air from my lungs. I wanted to tell him everything, that I had been just as scared, that I had replayed this moment in my head 100 times, that I had loved him in silence for so long it felt like part of me. But the words tangled up in my chest, too heavy to let out all at once. Instead, I whispered the only truth I could manage: "I'm scared too." He looked at me then with an intensity that burned, and for the first time I felt the weight of years of silence lifting just a little. We sat there, two boys caught between fear and longing, holding on to the fragile thread of honesty that connected us now. My fingers moved before my mind caught up, brushing lightly against his, testing the waters the way he had done. His hand didn't move away. Instead, his fingers curled around mine, tentative but sure, and I felt something inside me crack open. The couch, the room, the flickering television, all of it faded until there was only him, sitting so close I could hear the rhythm of his breathing. We didn't need more words right then. That small act of holding hands carried more weight than any confession could. It was awkward, trembling, new, but it was real. For the first time in my life, I wasn't carrying the secret alone. For the first time, I let myself believe that maybe love, even this kind of love, could be ours. The days after that night on the couch moved slowly, like the world had shifted but only we knew it. I carried the memory of his hand like a secret flame, burning quietly inside me, warming me, and terrifying me all at once. When we saw each other again, everything felt different even though nothing had been spoken out loud. His smile lingered longer, his eyes held mine in ways that made my heart trip, and every word he said carried an undertone I couldn't ignore anymore. We walked side by side, sometimes close enough for our shoulders to brush, and each time it happened I felt my whole body tense with both fear and want. I knew we were playing a dangerous game, that if anyone noticed we would be judged, whispered about, maybe worse, but the pull between us was stronger than reason. At school, in the crowded hallways, we tried to act normal, but the secret followed us like a shadow. In class, I caught him watching me when he thought no one else would notice, and my chest would tighten with a mix of pride and panic. At lunch, our conversations carried hidden meanings, words twisted carefully so others couldn't guess but we both understood. The smallest things became electric, the way his hand brushed mine as we reached for the same notebook, the sound of his laugh echoing against my ribs, the casual way he said my name like it meant something more. Yet beneath the thrill, there was a quiet fear I couldn't shake. What if someone saw? What if someone asked questions I wasn't ready to answer? I had built walls around this part of me for so long, and now, because of him, those walls were starting to crack. Part of me wanted to run, to hide, to push him away before anyone else could see the truth unraveling between us. But then there was the other part, the one that had been starved of touch and love, the one that came alive every time he leaned closer, every time his hand lingered near mine. That part was louder now, demanding to be heard. One evening, we found ourselves walking home together, the air heavy with the kind of silence that says more than words ever could. The sun was low, the sky painted with orange and pink, and the quiet felt sacred, like we were standing on the edge of something neither of us had the courage to name. When we reached his street, he slowed down, his hand brushing mine again, and this time he didn't pull back. Neither did I. The world around us faded, and all I could feel was the weight of his skin against mine, simple but full of meaning. I looked at him, and in his eyes I saw the same mix of fear and longing that lived in me. It was unspoken, but it was real. That night, lying in my bed, I replayed it over and over. I thought about what it meant, about how much harder things would get if we kept walking this path. But I also thought about the warmth of his hand, the way my heart had steadied the moment he didn't let go. And somewhere between fear and hope, I realized that maybe, just maybe, I didn't want to keep living behind walls anymore. The days after that night felt different, though it was hard to explain how. On the surface, nothing seemed to change. We still walked together to class, still shared the same inside jokes, still laughed in that way that made my chest feel light. But underneath all of that, there was something new, something unspoken but undeniable. Every glance lasted a little longer, every brush of his shoulder against mine sent a spark through me. And yet, with that closeness came confusion that lingered in the back of my mind like a shadow. I kept asking myself if what happened on the couch was real or just a fragile moment that would fade. I wondered if he regretted it, if maybe I had imagined the weight of it all, because he never mentioned it again. He acted the same as always, easy and carefree, while inside I was twisting with questions I was too afraid to ask. At night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying everything over and over again. His words, his touch, the way he looked at me. I thought about how safe it felt, but also how dangerous it seemed if anyone else were to notice. Fear and longing pulled me in two directions until I couldn't tell which was stronger. I didn't want to lose him, but I also couldn't keep pretending nothing had changed. Every morning when we met, I wanted to say something, to ask him what we were now, but the words would get stuck in my throat, leaving me trapped in silence. One afternoon, when the world was moving at its usual pace and we were sitting together again in the cafeteria, I noticed how his eyes found me even when we weren't talking. He laughed at something someone else said, but his gaze came back to me as if I was the anchor he couldn't drift away from. That was the reassurance I needed, even if he never said a word. His actions spoke quietly but powerfully. He sat closer than he needed to, he saved me a seat without asking, he made sure I had food before he did. They were small things, but each one felt like a message meant only for me, reminding me that what I had felt on that couch wasn't just in my head. Still, doubts found their way in. When I overheard people whispering about two boys in another grade who had been caught holding hands, their laughter sharp and cruel, it made my stomach knot. I thought about how easily that could be us if we weren't careful. The thought of being mocked, of being judged by everyone around us, pushed me into retreat. I started creating distance where I didn't want it, afraid of what the world might do if it saw us too clearly. I laughed less, spoke less, kept my hands folded tightly in my lap when we sat together, because even though I wanted to reach for him, I didn't dare. He noticed. Of course he noticed. One evening as we walked home, the air cool around us, he stopped in the middle of the street and looked at me with a seriousness I rarely saw in him. "You're pulling away," he said quietly, not accusing, just observing. The truth of it hit me like a wave, and I had no excuse to hide behind. I tried to look away, but he stepped closer, his voice low and steady. "If you're scared, I get it. I'm scared too. But don't shut me out." Hearing those words made something inside me crack. I realized then that while I was busy protecting myself from the world, I was hurting the one person who had chosen to stand with me in it. His eyes held so much patience, but also a flicker of hurt that I never wanted to see there again. I wanted to tell him everything, about the voices in my head, the fear of being exposed, the way every stare from strangers felt like a judgment, but instead I simply nodded, because even admitting that much was hard. My silence must have told him enough, because he sighed softly and reached out, his hand brushing mine for only a second before pulling back. It was his way of saying he was still here, still waiting for me to choose him fully. That night, lying awake again, I realized something I hadn't before. He wasn't asking me for some grand declaration or for me to stop being afraid. All he wanted was honesty, to know that I was willing to let him in even if I didn't have all the answers. And in that realization, I felt something shift. Maybe love wasn't about erasing the fear, but about having someone who didn't run when it showed up. Maybe it was about building something stronger than doubt, one moment at a time. The next day, when we found ourselves back on that same couch where everything began, I didn't let the silence consume me. I didn't run from the weight in the air. Instead, I turned to him and said quietly, "I don't know what's going to happen, but I don't want to pretend anymore." His eyes softened instantly, and without hesitation, he reached for my hand. This time, I didn't pull away, and I didn't hide. I let his fingers wrap around mine, and for the first time in days, I felt steady. In that simple act, I realized something important. The world might still judge, but here, in this space we created together, I was safe. And maybe that was enough for now. It didn't take long before the outside world began to creep in, reminding me that what felt safe between us might not stay hidden forever. For weeks, we had been moving quietly, carrying this fragile secret like it was a flame we were both shielding with our hands. I told myself it was enough to have him in these stolen moments, to feel his hand brush mine when no one was looking, to share glances that lasted a second too long but spoke louder than words. Yet deep down, I knew the world had a way of noticing things it wasn't supposed to, and soon, it did. It started small, just whispers. A friend of his asked jokingly why we were always together, why he didn't seem to care about dating anyone else. Another time, when we were walking down the hall side by side, I caught two kids staring, one nudging the other and smirking. My chest tightened instantly, fear crawling up my throat as if I had been caught doing something wrong. He brushed it off with a laugh, pretending not to notice, but I saw the way his jaw tightened. Later that night, the weight of it pressed down on me harder than I expected. What if the rumor spread? What if people started to talk the way they always did about anyone who was different? I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my thoughts racing in circles, each one darker than the last. The next day, I found myself pulling away again without meaning to. I sat a little further from him at lunch, spoke a little less when others were around, and laughed only when I thought it was safe. It wasn't that I wanted distance, but fear wrapped around me like chains, dragging me into silence. He noticed, of course he did. His eyes followed me with quiet confusion, but he didn't say anything at first. It was when we were walking home that evening, the air heavy with the smell of rain, that he finally stopped in his tracks and turned to me. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice low, steady but laced with hurt. I opened my mouth, but the words tangled inside me. I wanted to tell him I was just protecting us, that I couldn't handle the thought of people looking at us with suspicion, of whispers turning into accusations. But what came out instead was broken and messy. "People are starting to notice," I muttered, my eyes fixed on the ground. He stayed quiet for a long moment, and I could feel the weight of his gaze pressing down on me. When he finally spoke, his voice was sharper, though still soft. "So what? Let them notice. Why does it matter so much?" His question stung, not because it was cruel, but because it cut through every excuse I had been hiding behind. I lifted my eyes to meet his, and the frustration in his expression hit me hard. "It matters because I'm scared," I admitted, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. My throat burned, and my chest ached as I forced myself to go on. "I've seen what happens to people who don't fit, who don't hide. They lose everything. They become a joke." "I can't," my voice cracked, and I stopped, swallowing against the lump in my throat. His face softened instantly, and he stepped closer, his voice gentler now. "Do you really think I'd let that happen to you?" His words were full of conviction, but I shook my head, unable to explain the storm inside me. It wasn't about him protecting me, it was about the voices in my head that had been there for years, telling me I wasn't allowed to feel this way, that love like ours was something to be ashamed of. "It's not just about them," I whispered. "It's about me. I don't even know if I'm strong enough to carry this." For the first time since all of this began, I saw his eyes fill with something raw and vulnerable. He wasn't angry anymore. He wasn't even frustrated. He was hurt, not by what I said, but by the thought that I couldn't see what he already knew, that I was enough, that we were enough. "You don't have to carry it alone," he said softly, his hand twitching like he wanted to reach for mine but didn't dare until I let him. "I've been waiting for you to let me in, but you keep building walls. I can't break them down for you." His honesty hit me like a wave, pulling the ground out from under me. Tears pricked my eyes before I could stop them, and I turned away, ashamed of how weak I felt. But then, without asking, he stepped forward and touched my shoulder. It wasn't forceful, it wasn't demanding. It was steady, grounding. That simple touch broke me open in ways words couldn't. I turned back to him, my voice shaking as I whispered, "I don't want to lose you. That's what scares me the most. I can live with people talking, but I can't live without you." The truth spilled out before I could hold it back, and once it did, I felt both terrified and free. His expression softened into something I couldn't quite name: relief, love, maybe both. Slowly, carefully, he reached for my hand, and this time I didn't pull away. His fingers curled around mine, strong and certain, like he was anchoring me to something bigger than my fear. "Then stop running from me," he said quietly. "We'll figure out the rest together." Standing there on that dimly lit street, hand in hand, I realized the world could watch, whisper, even judge, but for the first time I felt a flicker of courage rise inside me. Not because the fear was gone, but because I finally believed I didn't have to face it alone. After that night when I finally admitted the fear that had been tearing me apart, something between us shifted. It wasn't sudden, not like a door swinging open, but more like a slow sunrise creeping over the horizon. We began to move differently around each other, more careful with our silences, more open with our truths. It was as if speaking the words I had kept buried so long had loosened something heavy from my chest, and even though the fear hadn't disappeared, it no longer had the same power over me. He knew my weakness now, he knew how scared I was, and instead of pulling away, he stayed. That alone began to change me in ways I hadn't expected. Our conversations grew deeper. We didn't just talk about school or music or the usual nonsense that used to fill our time. Now, late at night, when we sat together in his room or on that same couch that had witnessed so much already, we spoke about the things we had never dared say out loud. I told him about the years I had spent feeling different, how I had forced myself to smile through jokes that cut me quietly, how I had convinced myself that no one could ever love me the way I wanted to be loved. He listened without interrupting, his eyes steady on mine, like every word mattered. When I faltered, when my voice shook with the weight of my honesty, he would place his hand gently over mine and whisper, "You don't have to hide anymore." And he opened up too. He told me about the nights he had lain awake wondering if I would ever see him the way he saw me, how many times he had nearly spoken but swallowed the words out of fear of losing me. He confessed how lonely it had been to carry his feelings in silence, pretending every day that he was fine while he longed for more. Hearing his side made my chest ache with guilt and tenderness at the same time. All those years, we had both been carrying the same secret, both afraid of each other's rejection when we could have been finding strength together. As the weeks passed, small moments became lifelines. When we walked home, his hand would sometimes brush mine, and instead of jerking away, I let it linger. On evenings when the world felt too heavy, he would sit beside me in silence, our shoulders touching, his presence reminding me that I wasn't alone anymore. Those small gestures grew into something bigger. One night, while we sat under the fading glow of a streetlight, he reached for my hand without hesitation, and I didn't hesitate either. Our fingers intertwined easily, like they had always belonged that way. The simple act made my chest swell with something close to peace, something I had never known before. We found new rituals that became ours alone. We would take long walks after dark, when the streets were quiet and the world felt less watchful. We would share secrets that no one else knew, dreams of escaping this town, fears of disappointing our families, hopes that one day we could live without hiding. The more we spoke, the more I began to feel myself changing. For the first time, I was learning to accept that my feelings weren't something to be ashamed of. They were human, real, deserving of a place in the light. And the reason I could even begin to believe that was because of him. He didn't just love me, he reflected back the parts of myself I had been too afraid to see. The couch where it all began became a symbol of our growth. It wasn't just a piece of furniture anymore, it was the place where silence had turned into confession, where fear had turned into touch, where lies had been stripped away. Whenever we sat there now, it felt like a reminder of how far we had come. Sometimes we would just sit in quiet, his hand in mine, the glow of the television flickering in the background, and I would think about how something so ordinary had become extraordinary because it held our truth. Yet even with this closeness, doubt still lingered in the corners of my mind. I would catch myself wondering how long we could keep living like this, in the space between being hidden and being free. But instead of letting the fear consume me, I found myself sharing it with him. What if people find out? I asked one night, my voice trembling. He squeezed my hand gently and said, "Then they find out. But it doesn't change what's real between us." The simplicity of his answer left me stunned. Where I saw disaster, he saw only us. Where I saw risk, he saw love worth fighting for, and slowly, his certainty began to shape me. The more time we spent together, the more I realized that love wasn't about being fearless. It was about choosing someone even when the fear was there, even when the world might not understand. His love didn't erase my doubts, but it gave me strength to face them, to believe that maybe I was capable of being braver than I ever thought. Every touch, every whispered confession, every shared silence was stitching me back together in ways I hadn't even known I was broken. By the time the season began to change, I could feel myself changing too. I laughed more freely, I spoke more openly, I let myself lean into him without worrying who might notice. We weren't just surviving anymore, we were building something together. And though I knew the world outside still carried dangers, still held the power to wound us, I also knew this, as long as he was beside me, I could face it. For the first time in my life, I didn't just believe in love. I believed in myself. It was bound to happen eventually, that moment when the quiet bubble we had built around ourselves would break. For weeks, we had been careful, moving in the shadows, sharing our closeness in stolen moments where no one else was watching. But the truth is, you can't hide something forever when it shines through every glance, every smile, every second of comfort that two people share. I think deep down I always knew someone would notice, but I wasn't ready for how quickly everything would unravel once it did. It happened on an ordinary afternoon, the kind of day where the air felt heavy with late summer heat and the world seemed too sluggish to pay attention. We were sitting outside, tucked away on a bench near the back of the school, the place we often went to escape the noise. His hand brushed mine and without thinking, I let it stay there, our fingers lacing together in that quiet way that had become second nature to us. We weren't laughing, we weren't even speaking, we were just existing together, and it felt like enough. But then I heard footsteps behind us, sharp and quick, followed by a voice I knew too well. "Are you two, holding hands?" The words dropped like a stone, heavy and impossible to ignore. I jerked my hand back instinctively, my chest tightening so fast it hurt to breathe. Standing a few feet away was someone from our class, their eyebrows raised, their eyes wide with the kind of curiosity that I had dreaded since this began. My stomach churned, panic clawing at me as I searched for an excuse, a way to twist what they had seen into something harmless. But before I could even open my mouth, he spoke. His voice wasn't defensive, wasn't hurried. It was steady. "Yeah. We are." I turned to look at him, my heart nearly stopping. His eyes met mine for just a second, calm and unwavering, like he was telling me without words that he wasn't afraid anymore. My body shook with fear, but there was something in his expression that held me still, something that made me feel both exposed and protected at the same time. The classmate blinked, clearly caught off guard, before muttering something under their breath and walking away quickly, their steps uneven with surprise. But the damage was already done. We both knew it. Word would spread, and once it did, there would be no taking it back. As soon as they were gone, I pulled my hand away completely and stood, pacing a few steps with my breath coming fast. "What were you thinking?" I hissed, my voice sharp with panic. "Now everyone's going to know." My hands shook as I ran them through my hair, my thoughts spinning with images of the stares, the whispers, the cruel laughter I was sure would follow. But when I turned back to him, he wasn't panicking. He was sitting there quietly, his eyes on me, steady and unflinching. "I'm tired of hiding," he said softly. "I don't care who knows anymore." His words stopped me cold. I wanted to be angry at him, to shout, to demand why he would risk everything so easily. But instead, what I felt was a deep ache, the kind that comes when someone shows you a strength you wish you had. I sank back onto the bench, burying my face in my hands. "I'm not like you," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I'm not that brave." He reached out slowly, his hand resting against my back, the warmth of his touch grounding me in the middle of my storm. "You don't have to be," he murmured. "Not all at once. We'll face it together." The next few days were harder than I could have imagined. Whispers followed us down the halls, not always cruel, but sharp enough to cut. Some people stared, others avoided us entirely, and every time I caught those looks, my heart shrank in my chest. But through it all, he never let go of me, not literally, but in the way he carried himself. He didn't flinch when people looked, didn't lower his voice when he spoke to me, didn't act like we had something to be ashamed of. And slowly, I began to realize that his courage wasn't about ignoring fear. It was about choosing us despite it. One afternoon, when I was at my breaking point, I told him I didn't think I could handle it anymore. My words came out in a rush, filled with frustration and exhaustion. "Everyone's looking at us. I feel like I can't breathe." He listened quietly, letting me pour out everything I had been holding in, and when I finally fell silent, he took my hands in his. His eyes were firm, steady, filled with a certainty I envied. "Let them look," he said. "They don't know what this feels like. They don't know what it's like to find something worth holding on to. Why should we let their fear steal our happiness?" In that moment, something inside me shifted. I realized he wasn't just fighting for himself, he was fighting for me too. For us. And as I sat there, staring into his eyes, I felt a flicker of strength ignite in me, a strength I didn't know I had. Maybe I wasn't as brave as him yet, but I wanted to be. I wanted to stand beside him without shame, without hiding, without apologizing for the love that had already saved me in so many ways. So when we walked through the halls the next day, and I felt the familiar sting of eyes on us, I didn't pull away when his shoulder brushed mine. I didn't lower my head or try to disappear. Instead, I let the moment pass, my chest still tight but my step steady. Because deep down, I knew that this was the beginning of something bigger than fear. It was the beginning of choosing love, no matter who was watching. The weeks that followed felt like walking through fire and water at the same time. Every day came with its own battles, small and large. Some people whispered and laughed when they thought we couldn't hear, some avoided us entirely, and others just watched with unreadable eyes that made me feel exposed in ways I wasn't ready for. But there were also quiet surprises, friends who didn't flinch, who stayed beside us like nothing had changed, who offered small reassurances with their presence alone. And as much as the fear still sat heavy in my chest, I began to notice something else rising in its place, the fragile, trembling beginnings of freedom. For the first time, I wasn't hiding the part of me that had always felt locked away. At home, though, things weren't so simple. I could feel the weight of my secret pressing harder each time I walked through the door, knowing that sooner or later, the truth would find its way there too. My family noticed my silences, the way I drifted off at dinner, the sudden brightness in me that I couldn't explain. I told myself I would keep it hidden, that it was too dangerous to let them see, but the longer I tried to balance two worlds, the heavier it became. He noticed it too. One night, sitting together in the quiet of his room, he looked at me with that unshakable calm of his and said, "You can't keep splitting yourself in two forever. You deserve to be whole." His words lingered in me long after I left, echoing every time I caught my reflection, every time I felt the pull between who I was at home and who I was when I was with him. The breaking point came sooner than I expected. A relative saw us together one afternoon, his arm around my shoulder as we walked home, laughter spilling between us with the kind of ease that couldn't be mistaken. By the time I stepped through my front door, the questions were waiting for me, sharp and demanding. Who was that boy? Why were you so close? My chest tightened, my throat burned, and for a moment I considered lying, spinning some half-truth that would let me escape. But the memory of his steady voice, the way he had refused to hide when he was confronted, pressed against my heart. And for the first time, I let the truth come out. "He's not just a friend," I said quietly, my hands trembling. "He's more than that." The silence that followed was heavier than any words could have been. Their faces shifted, confusion mingling with disbelief, disappointment flashing like a shadow. My heart raced, and for a moment I wanted to take it back, to run to my room and close the door and pretend none of it had happened. But the words were out, hanging in the air between us, and even though fear wrapped itself around me, there was also a strange kind of release. The hiding was over. The days after were some of the hardest I've ever lived. My family struggled, their questions sharp, their silences sharper. Some words hurt, cut deep, made me feel smaller than I had in years. But even in the middle of all that pain, I held on to something I hadn't had before. I wasn't alone. Every time I felt like collapsing, I thought of him. Every time doubt crept in, I remembered his voice telling me I didn't have to hide. He became my anchor, the reminder that even if the world around me shook, there was one place where I was safe, one person who saw me fully and still chose me. And slowly, something unexpected began to happen. Though the conversations at home were tense and difficult, though the looks sometimes carried more pain than love, there were moments of quiet change. A softened question here, a longer silence that didn't feel so sharp, a sigh that seemed less angry and more tired. It wasn't acceptance yet, not fully, but it was the beginning of something, a space being carved where one hadn't existed before. And in that small shift, I found hope. By the time the seasons turned, I felt transformed in ways I couldn't have imagined when this began. I was no longer the boy shrinking from his own truth, no longer the one who thought love was something he didn't deserve. I was learning, slowly, painfully, but surely, that love was not a weakness, that being seen was not a curse. And more than that, I was learning that the world doesn't crumble the way you fear it will when you finally step into the light. It shakes, it resists, but it also changes. The couch where it all began was still there, still waiting for us in the quiet of his home. One evening, as we sat together, the television flickering its soft glow over us, I thought about everything we had endured to get here. My hand found his without hesitation, and this time I didn't flinch, didn't glance over my shoulder to see if anyone was watching. I just held on. The fear was still there, yes, but it was smaller now, dwarfed by something bigger, something stronger. Because I knew, sitting there with him, that I had chosen love, and I would keep choosing it again and again, no matter how the world tried to shape me. For the first time I felt whole.